Welcome back. I thought that I would do a short question and answer session and just a little recap of where we've gone so far. Let's start with the recap, and that is are near death experiences, are they something which is just brain based, or are they something which indicates possibly an extension of consciousness beyond the brain? Now, this question will never be answered uh, because it depends very much on the belief structure of the physicist or the physiologist or the psychiatrist who's examining. Let's first of all take everything is matter, just everything is matter, and that there's no conscious component to anything. It's all random chance, billiard balls banging about in space. If you take that view, then there are a whole set of things which don't fit into it. And also, you have to understand that taking that view, it's just a belief, it's a hypothesis. I believe that everything is just matter. There is no conscious component to it, there is nothing else. So that's a system of belief. Now, there's another system of belief, and you can decide which one you like best, is that there is more than just matter. In other words, there is uh, the conscious component of the universe. And then you can break that down in various ways. You can say everything is conscious, or you can say some things are conscious, and then you have to decide where you're going to draw the line. For example, are stones conscious? Or is the grass conscious? Are trees conscious? And then you come along to the animals. Are earthworms conscious? Or are apes conscious? Or is this big ape of all the apes, us, are we conscious? I don't think any of you will have any doubt about the last question, because I can't believe that any of you are going to say you're not conscious, because this seems to be the primary characteristic of us. I see I have a cat here. Is this cat conscious? It's very happy to be included. It's a very dependent cat. Is it conscious? Well, I think it shows a lot of things to suggest that it is, because in many ways it behaves like me, particularly over food. If it wants food, then it will meow a lot until it gets its food. It's something which I do, except I do it in a more controlled way than this cat does. Now, the other limitation on there is a conscious component or a mind component, you like that, to the universe is that uh, it may be that we've always been putting the bar too high, expecting everything to behave like us. There's one branch of it, it's called panpsychism, which says everything is alive. No question about that. Consciousness is in everything. Even the little billiard balls that the other theory considers just to be moving random, first of all, move on the laws, and secondly, they may be conscious themselves. So you have to choose, and there's no reason why you shouldn't choose one or the other. But supposing you choose that everything is material, then how are you going to cope with the fact that there's very good evidence for telepathy? I suppose you can argue, if you like, before radio was invented, then it has some of the characteristics of telepathy. Maybe there is a physical component to that. We don't know. Remote viewing, I talked about last time, is another one. Premonitions, in other words, time distortions. We know what's going to happen. Is that just part of billiard balls banging together randomly, or does it show something else? And of course, we talked about Maslow and talked about the fact that he changed his level of consciousness. Now, there's an interesting thing. Are there different levels of consciousness? So when we come to the near-death experience, we have those thoughts as background. We saw the first thing was the out-of-body experience, then going down the tunnel, and we've got as far as, and I'll do next time, the coming out into the magical world, which is like an English garden, except you'll find, in fact, when we actually look at the data, this is an oversimplification of what people find. So I thought that perhaps we could use the rest of this recording to just think about some of the questions that we've been asked, that I've been asked. Is there a hell or heaven? Well, have you ever seen a hell? Have you? Devils, pitchforks, smell of sulfur, fire? Bet you haven't. Have you ever seen a heaven? Angels, strong light, love. You've seen that? Some of you may, but I bet not many. Now, I've had a lot to do with dying people, and I have not seen one. All the dying people I've seen who in fact feel that there is a hell. I don't think it exists. I don't think there are devils. These are very much a construction of the mind and culture, because after all, they went with the Middle Ages when it was very important for the church to scare us all with devils. So what about heaven? Well, we now come to a very interesting part of the discussion, which falls right out of the near-death experience. And that is the question of an extension of consciousness. Do people somehow or other extend their consciousness? Now, if you believe the reductionists, that's those people who just believe in the random physical world, they've got no place for it. They would just say it's another brain construct. And they would point to drugs like psilocybin and LSD causing aspects of it, but of course nothing like it completely. A recent paper has come out on ketamine, which shows that many of the features of ketamine are very much like those of the NDE. So they may be right in the ketamine case, but not in the others. So what about the ideas that there is a transcendent world, a world which is beyond, which is full of light and consciousness? Now, there's very good evidence that many people, many different cultures have experienced this. And what's very exciting for me is that it looks as if we're coming close to finding a key for altering our consciousness. Now, I think I mentioned this last time, but in case I didn't, I think if you could just take a note of somebody called Jeffrey Martin. He works in California. Of course, he'd have to. Consciousness, California goes together, doesn't it? And he has collected over 2,500 people with expanded consciousness. And, much more important, he thinks that he's found a way for getting people to flip from their everyday conscious into a different level or different conscious state. And if you get people to do that and they have a set of experiences which are quite different from those of the ordinary everyday person, one could argue that some of it would be a change in brain function, because we know in meditation there's a change in brain function. But some of it, I would suggest to you, is in fact a natural extension of conscious experience And so we are, in some sense, as Maslow suggested, uh, loosening the filter, which normally keeps this view of reality away from our knowledge and our understanding and our perception. So it's within that one has to think about heaven. And when I come on to doing the seminars on dying, I will use words like non-duality, which means we in fact aren't split, because you're split now. You see me talking and you feel your inside. So there's an outside there and an inside. And that means you're in duality, two of you. Non-dual means the whole thing is one picture, just one thing. And if you become non-dual, then the very idea of a random universe goes immediately, because a random universe predisposes that it's seen by a random element. It is seen by a random element. Now that is dual language. So when you become non-dual, then your perception of reality changes enormously. And I think what is equally important is that there are different extensions of non-duality. There's a whole range of them. And when you come into what the mystics describe in mystical states, then non-duality extends really very far. And it's called ongoing non-symbolic experience or persistent non-symbolic experience. But we'll get into that later on. So we're talking about persistent non-symbolic experience or ongoing non-symbolic experience. So in those very wide states, you could argue that there is a lot to do with heaven, sort of heaven-like place. And indeed, when we come to discuss in our next broadcast the features of the area that people go into, we'll look at this in more detail. So do I believe in heaven or hell? Hell, certainly not. Heaven, I think probably you could if you extend consciousness. Have I ever seen an angel? I haven't, but I know people who have. And a lot of people report that they have guardian angels. I haven't seen them. They have. And they will describe them to me. And some people describe guardian angels, and they can occur in pathology, and people who have epileptic auras sometimes see figures, mainly on their right-hand side, and some of them misinterpret those as being guardian angels. So angels certainly seem to be there if you're sensitive to seeing them. And when we start talking about the outer ranges of consciousness, then people do talk about angelic presences, and some people talk about the presence of angelic presences when we die, but we'll come into that. Should we talk about dying in school? Yes, of course we should. I don't know how many of you remember, but when you were kids, you would have had a family pet, and the family pet dies. Don't you want an explanation for that? Should we stop you having it? Many of you have got grandparents, and they will have died. And don't you want to understand those? Shouldn't we be telling our children about it? Yes, of course we should. And so I think that there are some subjects which need to come into the curriculum, or are taught there, or the children are exposed to what the actual process of dying is. Can be done through religious education, if you like, but what they should do is discuss the scientific evidence for as we come up to death, rather than going from a belief structure. Do I believe in an afterlife? I think this is going to be a question of experience, because those who experience wider states of consciousness, they talk about a component of you, that's you and me, that is never born and never dies. Difficult concept. What do you mean? I'm just this flesh and bones. Well, the answer to that is probably not. When you're in those states of consciousness, you see yourself as something really rather different. So, do I believe in an afterlife? Yes, in one sense, but I don't believe that all this baggage of this life is something which is carried forward. You might ask me is whether I believe in reincarnation or not. And the answer to that is look at the data. There's Ian Stevenson. He's found over 2,000 cases of reincarnation, and Jim Tucker, who's taken over his post in Virginia, has found many American cases. So that's what the scientific data looks as if it is, and would be supportive of that. Has there been a time with NDE'S where there were no tunnels or light? Yes, absolutely. And one of the things about NDE'S is that they don't fit the general stereotype. Very often there's no tunnel. You may float through darkness, or you may cross a river, or you may progress in some other way. And light, there's usually, if the NDE goes that far, there's usually light of some sort. But remember, the light has a particular quality to it. It's loving, supportive, holds you. All these sorts of expressions are used. Warm, friendly. And so, yes, they are there. They're not there. Well, I hope that helps. And so thanks very much for listening today. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do this area that you go into when you come out of the tunnel. Okay, thanks so much.